TCS Live, hockey's premier coaching conference, is coming up June 12th to 14th at the University of Michigan, located in beautiful Ann Arbor. TCS Live is where hockey's top leaders influence the evolution of the game by sharing their experience and expertise with our global community of coaches. Often referred to as the TED Talks of hockey, TCS Live is not your typical coaching clinic. It's an experience that includes keynote presentations, on-ice demonstrations, live interviews, workshops, social receptions, exhibitors showcasing the latest tools and technologies available for coaches, and so much more. It's where passionate coaches like yourself come to learn about the latest trends in the game, connect with coaches from around the world, and most importantly, get inspired to have an even greater impact on the teams and athletes that you lead. Check out our list of current and past presenters. Go to thecoachesitelive.com and make sure you sign up to be notified when new speakers are announced and to receive event updates as we get closer to the big show. If you love coaching, I promise you're going to love attending TCS Live. And best of all, because you're tuning into the GLASSANDOUT podcast, we're going to save you $100 on the cost of your ticket. Simply enter the coupon code GLASSANDOUT at checkout. Also, if you're a coach from Canada or the US, you will receive continuing education credits on behalf of Hockey Canada or USA Hockey. So make sure to let your association know, as this is part of maintaining your coach certification. Join myself and our Coach Site community at TCS Live, June 12th, 14th at the University of Michigan. It's an absolute blast. I'll see you there. I went on a deep dive last night on Little Canada, Minnesota. And I was like, I don't know how I didn't know this was, like, I thought it was fictional when I was reading about where you grew up. And I ended up going down, and this is a real place in Minnesota.
It is actually a real place. It's actually,
what's the backstory?
Well, I don't know a lot about the history, so I'm not going to pretend that I do. I just know that there is some tie to Canadians, I think French Canadians in particular, that came down into Minnesota and they settled here, which is why they call it Little Canada. But it's also been voted like the weirdest name in the state of Minnesota. So kind of an interesting spot to land from where you were from. So.
No kidding. And what was, now my understanding is, just looking at the geography, it's a community, but it's in the metropolitan area of the cities.
Yes.
What was growing up there like?
It is a very small town. So I always tell people it's right outside of St. Paul because no one ever has any context of where Little Canada is. So we're about 10 minutes from downtown St. Paul, which makes it really convenient just to be that close to the cities. But yeah, like I said, really, really small town. We grew up right in Little Canada. My dad threw a rink in the backyard. So that was the only rink, really, so to speak, in Little Canada, was the one that was in my backyard. And then I grew up and played hockey in Roseville, which is a little bit more well known to people.
My appreciation is that Roseville is, let's call it, a bit of a blue blood hockey program in the state of Minnesota. I understand that you won a state championship.
Yes. Yep.
When you were in high school. So I'm sure people are tired of me talking about this, but I was just down in Minnesota for the boys state high school championship. Absolutely pinned my ears back. Like, I thought I knew what I was getting into. Like, I'd seen the videos on YouTube about the hair, and I saw that the X is sold out, etc. But what you don't appreciate in that is the community spirit, and how each of these schools, like the student section, the parents, it was unbelievable. And it left me thinking, like, particularly putting my parent hat on, I'm like, if this was the last hockey game you played as a young person, just how influential that whole experience would stick with you. Not just winning a championship, but it appeared to me you're winning a championship with friends you've had since you first laced up your skates.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're spot on. So when I went to Minnesota, I had 3 roommates that were Canadian,
Yeah.
and then 1 from Wisconsin with Amanda Kessel, and that was a completely new experience for them. We went over to watch the state tournament, and they were similar to you, just in awe of the community support and just packing a venue like that. Obviously, on the girl side, it's a little bit more challenging to fill the 18,000 plus of the XL Energy Center, but to your point, it never seemed to matter. Like, when you're an athlete and you're down in those professional locker room spaces, and living the day to day of the Wild and now the PWHL team. And being able to just play in that type of venue, there's nothing like it. And so, from a standpoint of just hockey memories, I think that is what makes Minnesota so special. Is that so many people do they start their hockey careers in their local communities, and so many people continue to do that through their whole high school experience. And so it's unique in that you get to play with a lot of the same people for 10, 15 years, which is really, really special.
No kidding. If we were to look at, let's call it your competitive DNA,
Mhm.
where does winning a championship on that stage in your formative years, where does that live in sort of, who you are as a coach and leader today? What do you
Yeah.
learn from that?
Yeah, I think it's obviously, like I said, it's special, it's different than any other type of championship that you could win because of that community environment. And so for me, I think especially being a coach that coaches out of the Twin Cities and remains in the state of Minnesota, I think from a recruiting standpoint and us going after so many Minnesota players just by nature, because there's so many in your backyard, it has a tremendous impact of where I am now and my coaching impact and leadership. Because I think it's one thing to have a shared experience with players just from a collegiate level perspective, but it's quite another to know what is it like to grow up in those communities and play in a state tournament and have some success there. So I probably don't give it enough credit, but that memory in particular of being a senior and winning a championship has definitely influenced and shaped a lot of who I've become.
From there, you go to Minnesota, you do a bit more winning, and I'm always deeply curious about examples of teams that are maybe in a competitive window for a duration of time, and in some cases they maybe punch their ticket and they get to the top of the mountain, but maybe other times they fall short. I'm always interested in when you can talk to folks like yourself with the benefit of hindsight, maybe what was the thing that happened in the year you were successful that maybe didn't happen in the years you fell short. So you go to Minnesota 4 seasons. Statistically, it would appear the Gophers were in contention all
Mhm.
4 years. Your sophomore and junior years, you win back-to-back national championships. What went right those years?
Yeah. The first and foremost is we had a lot of really good hockey players.
I
So
hear that helps.
yes, it helps tremendously. But yeah, in particular, my junior season, I mean, we were completely loaded. I mean, I compare it to the Wisconsin team from this year, where I mean, I feel like they're 8 players deep of national team players this year, and I see that team very similar to that group that I was a part of when I was a junior. We had Patty Kazmaier finalists, all three of them at the forward D and goalie position. So Amanda Castle, yep, and then we had Megan Bozek at defense, and then Nora Ratu was our goaltender. And so it certainly helps to have the talent. You need to have that, but you also need to have the culture. And I would say my freshman year, it was there to a degree. You know, we were a good team. We were together doing things the right way for the most part. But my sophomore year, I genuinely remember that being a shifting culture year where our senior captain at the time was Sarah Erickson, and I was a sophomore. And I remember she took me to lunch and she was like, "Hey, you know, I've been talking with the coaches. I think we really need to start thinking about our culture more deeply." And
No
she's like,
way.
"Yeah." And so I remember, like, as a sophomore, sitting there with like who's my idol on the team, and she's talking about this, and she's like, "I can get the upperclassmen on board, but I need help with buy-in from the underclassmen. As a sophomore, I want you to help me in that space." And I was like, "Great, Sarah, like, I'm so on board." And I remember walking away and being like, I have no idea what she was talking about with culture. Like, that was the first exposure I've ever had really to that idea of, like, explicitly talking about culture and trying to build it.
Why
Um,
do you think she came to you?
I don't know. You know, I think Sarah and I always really connected. But in that moment, I mean, even you talk about like great hockey memories, just the amount of empowerment I felt from her in her coming to me in that space was pretty incredible. And I didn't even realize it at the time. I mean, I didn't even really think too much about culture at the time. And so that was the shift, I think, was my sophomore year, just a really intentional effort towards what culture means and how you live that out. And it's pretty amazing when you start to focus on that, how the winning starts to take care of itself.
We hear this said on the show all the time from coaches that, ultimately what you want is you want your players to have two hands on the wheel and to drive the bus. And when that happens and you kind of step back, um, that's when you have something special. But the conversation that you just described, like I don't sense that like that's a matter of a coach saying, "Hey, I want you to go talk to these players and talk about culture." Like that's very much an organic thing. As you're building a program now, have you learned anything about, I guess, creating an environment where that mentorship, that leadership, and that player-led growth just becomes a natural part of your program?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I've obviously poured into that thought process plenty over the years on the chance I'd ever get to this spot. And now that I'm in it, the last few months in particular, there's been a lot of investment into that thought process of not only how do you develop culture, because I think it's one thing when you live it. And like as a player, I feel very confident that I could go into a space of a locker room and, promote a positive environment to help in that way. It's quite another experience though to say like, how are you one layer removed from that as a coach,
Yeah.
and implement that in your group? How do you teach that to players? And so I think that's the challenge. That's the golden ticket question, right? And for me, I'm very kind of like research based, data driven. I love learning, and so I started to ask that question. I was like, well, how does culture really build? How do you develop it? I think at the staff level, at the coaching staff level, you really do need to have clear direction. You should have vision that should be shared with players, communicated often to go back to that. Values within your team instead of just knowing what you're going to do as a hockey program. It's also important to know who you are in the process and how you're going to engage with one another. So I think there are those organizational elements that are really important. But then, like you said, to put the onus back on the players because ultimately, you need a group that's self-governing because as a coach, you can't be in all those spaces, right? So, how do you teach that? How do you empower, in my case, these young women to become tremendous leaders and teammates and to lean into hard moments and show up and be themselves and really foster that environment? I think it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that coaches, I hope, are always leaning into.
I love that term, self-governing. I haven't heard that before. And just as you say that, it makes me think back on, have you read Jonathan Haidt's book, The
Hmm.
Anxious Generation? I was listening to him on a podcast recently, and he referenced that, he talks a lot about in the book about how, um, as just human beings and as young people, weird, like we thrive, or kids thrive in environments where there's multiple age groups, and the kids don't know that they're kind of looking out for each other, but they just inherently are. And the older kids sort of teach, and the younger kids model good behavior, etc. And that, he kind of shares that how the data indicates that environment, like that is the best thing you can do for young people, is to put them in that environment with other kids, and there's no parents around. And it just really made me think about, so much of team sports growing up is you're kind of with your peer group, but when you get to college, like that's, or junior hockey maybe in some cases, like that's the first time you're in that environment. And I think for anybody that's been around that, like that sort of dynamic of younger players with older players, um that can go really, really well, but it can also maybe not be the best environment depending on the culture.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's why it's important to leverage people, regardless of age. I probably sound like every other coach in the country that would say like be a leader regardless of your age, right? Like, a senior could be your best leader, but you might also have a freshman who's just tremendous in that space. So I think there is something to be said about modeling and being older and being able to show players, this is what it looks like, but I do think that happens at the coach level too. I mean, if your upperclassmen are going to learn it, they should be learning it by the direction of their coaches and how you live
Yeah,
your
good
everyday
point.
life. So
Yeah.
I think there's an opportunity there from a professional standpoint of how are we showing up and how do we engage with them, because how we go, our players will go.
Well, so in this conversation, a bit of context for our listeners. Can we call you Dr. Bronson yet? Are we there yet?
No, technically you cannot. So
Okay, you're still Coach Bronson, still Coach Bronson. Okay. But in the near future, maybe by the time this gets released, you may be Dr. Bronson. So you're doing, and I'm going to make sure I got to read this to make sure I get it right. You are currently doing your PhD in organizational leadership policy and development. And I've got a whole host of questions about this, but I thought we could start here. What did your parents do, and what were the conversations like at the dinner table growing up?
oh gosh, good question. The off chance that we had to like sit down and eat dinner together as a
Sure,
family,
yeah.
running around from like sport to sport was rare, but we tried to make that happen as much as possible. So I grew up, I'm a middle child, which I know we get a bad rap. I have no idea why.
Yeah,
People think we're the troublemakers. I like to think that we keep the peace. But
yeah.
yeah, so I have an older sister, younger sister. They both played hockey. So there was a lot of, just opportunity, whether, like I said, in the backyard rink or growing up to play on teams together. My dad played very just kind of, pickup hockey. So he wasn't, he didn't play college athletics or anything like that. But no, I honestly, Aaron, I think when I think about any success I've truly ever had in any space, it actually does come back to my family and my parents in particular. They are the hardest working people you will ever meet in your life. We didn't come from a super affluent background, but they made sure that we got every opportunity regardless of that. And they made sure that while our lives were necessarily rich in being able to go all these places and do all these things, it was really rich in experience. And so they showed us a tremendous amount of support and love and care growing up, and belief too. I think anything we ever wanted to do, they believed it more than we did. And so some combination of kind of that blue collar work hard mentality and making things work, with that just like baseline of care and empathy and how they parented us, I think is a big difference in my life.
That's awesome. And part of the reason I ask is so I've got a friend. His name's Kyle Berg. Kyle, I used to coach when he was 16 years old. Played junior hockey. Obviously on the boys' side, goes to school after his 20-year-old season and goes to Simon Fraser University and ends up becoming the captain. But where this relates is that Kyle got a degree in psychology, and his interest in psychology developed from riding the bus in junior hockey, and he started reading about stoicism, got into Ryan Holiday, got curious, took the degree. So and he just shout out to Kyle, just got his master's from the University of Ottawa and was on staff with the team that won the national championship there. But so that kind of made sense to me when I was reading about your background and that you enroll as a true freshman at the University of Minnesota. Like, when did you get interested in psychology? And I could be, I might be ignorant here, but I'm like, how many kids in high school are like, I want to get into psychology?
I feel like not that many. I mean, they have the AP classes and stuff now in high school,
Yeah,
so there's some exposure to it, but, I actually started pre-med, and, I was just fascinated with, like, the human body and how we can make it better, all those things, and I always knew I wanted to help people, so I started that track, and Aaron, like, full disclosure, I was like, "I can't do this." After a couple of years, I was like, "I could, like, just pulling teeth, get through these classes."
yeah,
I could outwork everyone in the classroom if I really wanted to, but I looked at the trajectory of that and I was like, do I really want to do this for another 10, 12 years?
yeah,
Ironically, I'm in like my 12th year of schooling anyways. This isn't
yeah.
a
Okay.
space.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think my sophomore year probably, I kind of transitioned from this fascination with people and the human body into how we actually operate. So it was still kind of the same premise as just really fascinated with with people, but I wanted to understand them more than I wanted to understand how our bodies work. And so I think that was kind of the segue for me, as I took some psychology classes. Obviously, when you're in sports, there's kind of a natural inclination to think about sports psychology too. And for me, I was really passionate about leadership too. And so for me, psychology seemed like it was this all encompassing space that I could learn a lot. And I knew it would apply to anything I ever ended up doing.
Did you have any sense, like if we went back and spoke to you, on campus when you're 19, 20 years old and had to say like, where do you think this leads? Is it to becoming a NCAA head coach, or is it, off in some other arena?
No, I would say 0%. I would have said that at the time. I fell into coaching complete happenstance. So I went to Minnesota, I graduated, and then shortly after started a master's in counseling psychology. And my full intent was to go and get my PhD straight out of that. So I had applications ready, I had reference letters sent in, and I really believed I was going to go get my PhD and then do either sports psychology work or work in business psychology. But that was the plan. And then about 2 weeks before that school year actually started, Brad Frost, who was my coach at Minnesota at the time, called me and asked me to come back and coach. And I told him no because I was still finishing my
Yeah.
master's. I'm like, there's no way. I just can't do the full time master's program and coach. And then, oddly enough, I went to my internship for my master's program, which was ironically in a career counseling center. And my supervisor kind of started career counseling me in our first meeting and asked me if I'd ever come back and coach. And I said, well, it's funny that you asked that. Like my former coach actually
No
called me the
kidding.
other day. Yeah. And so I credit a lot of it to her name was Lisa at the time, and she talked me through it. And she's like, "Well, how many hours could you allocate from your practicum to coaching?" I'm like, "I don't know. I didn't ask." And she's like, "Well, how many days would you miss from this experience? Like, could you make the travel work?" I'm like, "I don't know." And she's like, so she just rifled questions at me for about 10 minutes. And then she told me I didn't have enough information to say no. So I went back to Brad at the time and I said, well, yeah, let's talk about this a little bit more. So I was a grad assistant, technically my first year. And then from there, it's just a job that's so hard to get out of, Aaron. You fall in love with it and just the opportunities that it creates for influence and connection with people. It's really hard to get out of. So here I am over 10 years later and I'm still
Wow.
coaching. Yeah. So it was not part of the original plan.
How quick, like, I'm always curious about this. So you get involved. How soon until you're like, you realize that, whether, people refer to as the coaching bug, you're just like, okay, like this is going to be really tough for this not to be a big part of my life moving forward.
Yeah, gosh. How long did that take? Not long. I
Yeah.
mean, I think because I was kind of at a tipping point, right, in my second year of my master's. Like I could have just done the grad assistantship. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what I thought. I was like, okay, I'll go do the coaching for a year. I'll finish my grad school at Minnesota. So it all made sense. It paid for the rest of my program. And then I think at that point I was like, well, maybe I stick around for another year. That was kind of fun. I don't have a family. There's not a lot of commitments right now outside of my work. So I stayed in it for a year. And then let's just say the third year probably was the coaching bug officially, because at that point I probably could have or should have gotten out of it if I was going to. But I couldn't. So
Funny story. You mentioned Brad Frost, your coach, you go on to coach them, still the coach at Minnesota. So when I started the coaches site and had no idea what we were doing, but we started this blog. And so one day we had this idea that we should like interview coaches and post the interviews, not like audio, but like actually writing it down on the blog, and that this would be interesting. And so, we're like, who could we potentially get in touch with? And we're like, oh, like Minnesota just won a national championship. I think this is 2012. And the first interview I did, it was with Brent Sutter, Red Deer Rebels. Second one was with Sheldon Keefe at the time, Pembroke Lumber Kings. Third one was with Brad Frost. And I'm looking at our server for this interview. It exists somewhere, but I somehow got a hold of him. I'm literally like on my phone scribbling out notes on like whatever his answers are. And I look back on that, I'm like, this poor guy, like, would a charity case be like, I'll help this like schmuck on the other end of the line who I have no idea who they are, but was unbelievably gracious, polite, and you know I've been really fortunate along this coach side journey where you have those interactions, and then you fast forward whatever it's been over a dozen years later, and you're like, yeah, that success makes all kinds of sense. And just be curious to know what your experience, being coached by Brad, and just, what sort of influence he's had on you given where you're at today.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly he is the reason I'm coaching. And so I would say that in my time at Minnesota, like I tell people this all the time. I was really, really lucky to be there at a special time. Whether it was from a cultural standpoint, like again, that was something that my sophomore year that really started to flourish, and we started talking about that a lot more. And I think that's why we had the success that we did. That, and of course the talent. And when I say the talent, I want to be very clear. I was like a third line and like proud of that type of player. Like I was amongst legends when I was there. So I was really, really lucky to be a part of a pretty tremendous group. But yeah, just the overall experience, I would say that was the most influential part of it. Was everyone thinks it's the hockey, right? Like you have these great years, great success. We won my sophomore, junior year, even into my senior year. A lot of people don't realize this, but we had only lost 2 games my senior year, and we didn't
Yeah.
lose my junior year. So we were just really in this like pivotal time, kind of a small, short legacy, few years of the program there when I was a part of it. And people always think it's the success that's on the ice that you remember the most. But I'm going to sound cheesy, but anyone that you can talk to in sports will tell you it wasn't even necessarily those moments, it was the other ones. And so whether that was, coming down from the coach level or at the player to player level, there was just so many countless memories that went above and beyond just the tactical side of sports, right? It was the experiences, it was the care for one another, the people that you were doing it with, that really made it the special experience that it ended up being.
I think it's rare that teams enjoy. It's funny, like, I just as early as this morning, scrolling on social media, and there was somebody unearthed an old clip of Michael Jordan, and he was just talking about, he's like, all my success is a product of all the failures and adversity that I had. And he starts listing them out, and it's like, everybody knows the story about not making the basketball team, but then he's like, yeah, like the Bulls sucked for most of the 80s, and there was a lot of pain. And I'd be curious to know, was there any adversity that maybe wasn't public facing, but any situations where you're like, hey, like, we still had to get through some stuff as a team, because ultimately I think that's where those bonds are really formed, or kind of getting through the shit, so to speak.
Yeah. Erin, I don't know if you've looked at the research on this, but there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. You're spot on. Like so often, like just a really close fostered culture within teams does come from some space of adversity or challenge together. Very rarely do you see a super successful program that didn't go through something significant. And I think back to my sophomore year as an example. We had one of my teammates lost her sister really unexpectedly. Yeah, and she ended up passing away at a very young age, had kids, and I never up until that point had the experience of a team coming together as much as we did. And I really do, like, when I think back to my sophomore year, I think a ton of that success that we had goes back to that moment of just unbelievable adversity for a teammate and coming together through that. And I think from there, then it was a springboard because again, like winning starts to kind of breed more winning as you do that. And so that was really a springboard, I think, going into the next couple seasons and our success from there.
You were a captain your final 2 seasons at Minnesota.
I was, yep.
Okay, and I'm going to preface this by saying, if you and I laced up our skates and went on the same rink right now, you would rinse me.
I don't
Okay.
know about that, Aaron.
You would,
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
what,
recently.
I might take a penalty and even the playing field a little bit, but I guarantee you would rinse me. And the reason I bring this up, you mentioned the amount of talent that you've had, so I'm sure that when Coach Brad Frost is looking around his room for leaders, like, it's easy to say, well, we've got tons of talent, and you look at the score sheet and you're like, okay, well, this is probably where we're gonna our attention gets drawn, but he selects you, or perhaps your peers select you. I could see where, on one hand, that's a real honor. On the other hand, as a young person in that environment, that could be equally intimidating in the sense that you look around the room, you're like, maybe I am the third liner. Like I'm not going to be the first called up on the power play yet. I've got to set the example, set the tone, etc. What did you learn through that situation? And I'd be curious, was there anybody that you could talk to or lean on at that point in your life to help you navigate that?
Yeah. I think, just being in that spot, because you're right, it is a little different. I mean, when I was in high school, I was fortunate to be a captain there too, but it's so much easier. I'll call it easy, when you are just like the best player on the team. Because you go out there and you lead by example, and you get the words wrong half the time, and people just still trust you because you go out onto the ice and you prove it. So I do think that was a learning curve for me a little bit, was to say like, okay, well, I've been put into this space, so how can I lead best when I can't resort to hockey being
Yeah.
the only thing to fall back on? And so for me, I don't know. I hope I was just doing it naturally at a younger age, and maybe that's why I was put into that position. But it really comes back to relationships. Like, if you make sure that you go out of your way, that every single player on the team knows that they are valued and cared for by you. It's that whole, like, the quote of, if you make it clear that you like people, it's awfully hard for them not to like you back.
Yeah.
Um, if you make it that really explicit, and that's at the foundation of everything that you're doing, is really that sense of relationship building with every teammate, you're going to be in a good space and you're going to do things the right way. And like, I even think of, this is going to make me sound crazy, and I swear I'm not. Or maybe I am, just not in this space. But a lot of hockey players have superstitions, and in college, I remember I went through and I kind of counted the superstitions that I had before a game, and just small things, like you put your left shin pad on first, whatever. So there's plenty of them, probably over 50 that most players naturally do.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Did you say over 50?
Yes. Well, I mean, Aaron, think about it. Like,
What
all
kind of nutcase were you, Bethany?
no, I mean, listen, I understand what OCD is, and I don't think it was that,
You,
okay? But
you
I'd
might be on the spectrum. You might be on the spectrum.
But yeah, like all the small things, you juggle
Yeah.
before the game. I was accounting for everything, during
Okay.
warm-ups, you tap that person. But long story short, I did realize in that moment, and I didn't know it up until then, is that I had a connection point with every single player on the team. So,
Like through the superstitions.
yes, yep. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
me and a classmate, we always exchanged a pregame quote, for example, before the game at the same time. With another one, like during our dynamic warmups, we always did the same stretch together every single day. So it was very small things, but it was a very, I don't know, light bulb moment for me of like the importance of small details and small engagements with people. And that's what I think leadership is. I think we get it wrong a lot of the time. We think it's the pregame speech or speaking in between the first and second and rallying the troops. I mean, there's moments that are important for that, but it's not everything. Like, leadership really is in those small, tiny moments when you show up for someone in a way that other people aren't.
I want to go back to something you said, and you prefaced by saying you've probably heard of like the quote, but it was, if you let people know that you like them, it's hard for them not to like you back. Did I get that right?
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah, if you make it clear that you like
Yeah.
people, it's hard for them not to like you back.
So I thought you were going to go to the Pat Quinn quote that,
Mm,
players only care when they know that you care. And
that too. Yeah.
yeah, preface that a bit, but where did that one come from? I've never heard that before. And that's, I think, so simple and impactful.
Yeah, I don't even know, where I read that or heard that for the first time, but I was like, gosh, is that not just the most, like, simple yet profound thought? Is like, life, it just doesn't have to be that complicated sometimes, and sometimes we make engagements with people or leadership out to be these really, really big things, but what if we simplified it? Like, there's a video by Drew Dudley. So anyone that listens to this, like, if I could have a takeaway, go watch this video. And it's by Drew Dudley. It's a TED Talk, and he talks about lollipop moments. And he walks you through this storyline, and to just kind of essentially put it in a condensed version, he talks about this moment where he has this engagement with this young woman, and she then has this engagement with a young man next to her. Well, this woman and this young man, they're in college, they actually ended up getting married, all because of this one small engagement that Drew had with them that just introduced them to one another. And it changed that girl's life. And then he ended up getting invited to their wedding and everything. And so it's a really, really profound and not as simple as we think idea, but really like just the amount of influence and impact you can have in the tiniest moment, and most of the time you don't even realize you're having it.
It goes without saying that, the impact this show and just the work we do at the coaches side and the folks that we're so fortunate to share some time with has been really impactful on me just as a leader and starting a business, etc. And some days are better than others. But my biggest takeaway, and I'll use the professional coaches we talk with. If we look at an NHL season, it's 82 games, there's travel. And what I've learned is that um, I think most coaches now have the intention to build relationships. We've all heard that. We know that that's important. We know that it matters. But what I've learned from them is that they understood that, the intention is one thing, but you have to design to be intentional about creating those moments, because you just expect that they're going to happen. If you just expect that, oh, well, when we're waiting for the bus, I'll just talk to Bethany in the lobby of the hotel and have an engagement. It's like, no, you've got to design those opportunities to have those lollipop moments, as you say. And that's really such a big part of leadership, is just, you can't expect it to happen. You have to make it happen. When you look at, and we'll get into the year that you just had, because the more that I dug into it, I'm like, holy smokes, like, yeah, more than a couple curveballs thrown your way. But how have you learned to maybe create those lollipop moments between you and your players?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Aaron, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It has to be intentional. We're all just way too dang busy to
Yeah.
not create the windows for that. So, whether that is individual meetings, we always do those at the beginning of the season, middle of the season, end of the season. I've also talked a lot about with other coaches, like the importance of touch points with players that are not connected to hockey, to have an intentional spot to say, come grab a coffee with me and refuse to talk about hockey. You ask them about their life and their academics and their family, because oddly enough, sometimes those are the conversations that end up taking care of the hockey stuff without you even trying to, because they might be in a rut or a sophomore slump or something like that. And then just the belief and knowledge that someone's in their corner or cares about them every day that they show up to the rink, sometimes that makes up for 50 extra reps of shooting from a certain space. They end up scoring that goal on Saturday because they care about you as a coach and they care about their teammates and how we're engaging with each other. So I think there's a ton of ways that you can do it. But to your point, the most important thing is being intentional and to carve out those windows. It can look a lot of different ways, but if you're making that attempt, you're going to be pretty successful.
We work with this amazing woman, Dr. Jody Carrington, and who, anybody that, if you go watch her talk on every coach should have to watch her talk on the coaches site. It's so impactful. But she has this great slide that she puts up, and it's a quote by Daryl Sutter, and it says, "I can make a player skate faster if I remember the name of their dog."
Exactly. There you go. She
And
said it
it's and, I,
better
and
than.
that's it. Yeah,
Oh, it's so true. That is so true.
yeah, it sticks with you. Okay, so I want to talk about your journey here at St. Thomas, but um, maybe we can start with when the Lee and Penny Anderson Arena opens. Actually, let's not go when it opens. 50 years from now, when you're taking your grandkids through the arena,
Yeah.
what are you going to point to and say, that was me? Like, that part of the space, like, I came up with that.
Oh
That's
gosh.
me. What influence have you had on this space? Because it looks
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the good thing and maybe the bad thing, but I would say the good thing is we're really in like final touches right now. So
Yeah.
for example, a couple weeks ago, we picked out the dashboard color. I'm not going to say it because I don't know if we're supposed to, but like it's a lot of that stuff. It's the
How fun is that?
little detail. Oh, it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I'm
bet.
glad I'm not in charge of it because there's a million of those
Yeah.
things to figure out, but I like to be a part of the conversation. But yeah, I would say, I mean, the biggest kind of thing for me that I've really enjoyed was so far as like designing of the locker room and the lounge space, because that's where you can really make it your own and based on your team. Now, 50 years from now, I hope that's wildly different. I hope it's decorated with all Americans and Olympians, and I hope there's a new seasoned coach that's got their values that they put their stamp on the program. But that's definitely been kind of the most rewarding thing for me because again, it really is kind of your private space and it's your home. And so I think that's the space that we're really diving into, pouring into to try to make it feel that way for our players.
So it would be really easy for someone like me to, you look at the renderings of the arena, it's coming in, you're a new coach. It just seems this, perfect influx of saying, hey, like this, you're in the best, arguably one, the best conference in women's hockey in the NCAA. All the ingredients seem to be there. However, I think we know in sport that, on one hand, the new arena, that sort of infrastructure can be really impactful, but it can also have little effect. When you look at your program, what are the foundational pieces, aside from, that infrastructure that need to be in place, in your opinion, to be successful?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the one thing that I will say about the rink from just like a tactical standpoint is you don't move into a new building and then win more games. There's no, or if there's research on that, please someone send it to me because I would love to see that. But I think what it does provide is the opportunity for resources that we haven't had so far. So it's not to say that we haven't been able to provide a really great experience in the first few years, but just the experience of our players being able to go to their class that ends at 10:55 and they walk 4 minutes over the rink. They're not getting in their cars and
Where's
drive.
your current rink? Is it off campus?
It is, yep.
Oh,
So
okay.
we were
Yeah, that's
currently
huge.
playing, yeah, out of St. Thomas Academy, which it's a nice rank. We had a great locker room set up, that sort of thing, but it's not to the standard of most Division One arenas. And so just the time and resources that will go into the new rink, that's where I think that actually helps you win when you can cut down those travel times so that the extra 20 minutes you spent in a car, you spend in a lounge with a teammate or the extra, opportunities to get on for skills ice and just get out there and work on that for the extra 10 minutes that you didn't otherwise,
Yeah.
and not rushing all the time. So I do think from that standpoint, I mean, just from a tangible perspective, like having a rink does help you win when it also comes along with all the resources, the hot tub, cold tub, weight rooms, shooting rooms, film rooms, all that. So I do think there is something to be said about that. But yeah, like I said, it's not going to be the solution for us. We play in the best conference in the entire country, and that's just statistically speaking. We shared this with our team. You'll think this is interesting. So we had kind of a springboard meeting following this season, and we were talking about next year and trying to kind of get our team on board and all moving in the same direction. And we were talking about our conference. And so we started to do some research, and there's a couple conferences that exist in sports that are somewhat similar. Like you look at the SEC in
How
football,
broad are we talking?
all
Like college,
sports,
all sport.
yeah,
Okay.
college sports, yeah. And so we're like, what is like the WCHA? SEC in football is comparable. They have quite a few teams that are, top 15 in the country. Everyone talks about how hard
Yeah.
that conference is. The other big one is ACC and women's soccer. So I believe they have,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah, they have like 7 of 17 in their conference are top 15 in the country, which is crazy. I mean, that's
Wow.
almost,
Yeah.
yeah, it's almost half. The WCHA in women's hockey this year, for example, we actually our statistic was 62 to 75% of the teams in our conference are top 15 in the country. So almost every weekend you are inevitably playing a top 15 team in the country, which is crazy. So across genders, across conferences, I would be very curious if there is another conference that exists, but I don't think there is. So that is it is a great challenge and also such a cool opportunity for players to come play at somewhere like St. Thomas, where it's like you're coming in and let's prove ourselves every single weekend. So I would say that's the other really pivotal part for us as we move into next year is not only acknowledging like, okay, this is our conference, but what's the opportunity there and being really detailed in our approach of how we're going to climb.
No kidding. Um, yeah, that's so interesting. Um, maybe worth noting too, Bethany, that when this past season began, you weren't the head coach.
Yeah.
You were named the head coach in November, I guess late November, under maybe unforeseen and circumstances. And I'm sure you were no different than any other assistant coach, in the NCAA or anywhere, frankly, where you think about what if I get the opportunity to be a head coach here, so I might do it. Normally, those opportunities come with a little bit of runway. I sense you
Right.
weren't maybe afforded that.
Yep.
Um, when the opportunity did present itself, how did you, with again what I would imagine is limited time, how did you sort of change your mindset, or did you have to change your mindset to say, okay, when I walk back into that rink in front of these players, like, you know, not that I wasn't trying to lead previously, but it's just different now.
Yeah. Yeah, it was certainly a very challenging year. You talk about adversity of a team and coming together. I mean, there's no circumstances like ours was to have that transition happen kind of mid-season. And so I think at the time, as we went from November into December break, the biggest priority was number one, making sure that our players just love the game of hockey. I mean, that always has to be a fundamental part of what you do. I don't think that matters if it's coaching 10 and unders or college or professional. Because as you know, like you could have a NHL professional player, and if he is not enjoying the game, there's no chance that he's playing his best hockey. I think that's just fundamentally who we are. And so that was really the highest priority as that transition happened was to enjoy the game and to love coming to the rink every day. And it was really kind of a one of the greatest privileges I would say of my coaching career when in January we met with our captains and we were talking to them and just kind of getting a gauge. And this is something that we try to do, every week or two is to have a captain touch point so you can kind of hear their voice and hear their perspective. And we were talking with them and we said, yeah, like how's the team doing? It's been a challenging year. And they said, we're really glad that you asked that because you guys have done such a great job of showing up at the rink and making sure that we're all just like in love with the game again. And we feel like people are in a really good spot. And I was like, that's so good to hear. And they're like, and um, we're ready for accountability again. We really are. We trust you guys. We know that you're here for the right reasons.
How
Like
cool is that?
it was, I mean, it gives me goosebumps thinking
I
back to
bet.
the conversation because what that told me in that moment is that they were giving that trust back to us, which I
Yeah.
think in some ways they felt like they maybe didn't have it in that moment with their coaches. And so they gave it back to us in that moment. And oddly enough, and that was right after we got blitzed pretty good by Wisconsin. And they, like I said, they're the best team I've ever seen in
Yeah.
college hockey. But we got totally blitzed. And it gave us permission that we get practice to hold them accountable and say, listen, regardless of the circumstances, that was not good enough. Like we need to make sure that we're a lot better than we were. And we did that all week leading up to Duluth, who was the fourth team in the country that weekend. And we practiced in that environment. We held them accountable. We really met them where they were at.
I
And
remember
we
this
ended up
weekend.
sweeping them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a historic weekend for us that all of a sudden they just turned a switch and said, yeah, we want to have fun, but we need accountability too. And we need to raise our standard of expectation and excellence. And then they have a weekend like that. So yeah, long answer to your question, but it's moments like that that really impact you.
I bet, as you're sharing that story, and it's interesting because just in doing research for this conversation, I've heard you mention a lot about the importance of getting input from your players, and I'm not suggesting that that's directly associated with that conversation you have with your captains, but I'm just like, man, like what a lesson to get in your first year. Like how blessed are you just to go through that and have that as something you can reflect on and as you move throughout your coaching journey. When you first got in front of the team though, I think, I look at your roster, you had a really young team this year. You've touched on the fact that you're playing a lot of powerhouses in your conference. And, you know, I think sometimes there's an assumption that every coach gets up in front of their team at the start of the year and says, our goal is to win the championship. And, winning looks different for different teams at different times. What was the expectation you set for your team, again, under, tough circumstances when you first became the interim head coach to sort of set the table for the rest of the year and what maybe success would look like for your group?
Yeah, it's funny that you say, like, the player's perspective of it because, I'm humble enough to admit I think we were all figuring that out together, in the second half of the year is, like, what does success look like for our group? And so I think it really was that balance of, how do we foster this team environment that we are all together and we're enjoying coming to the rink every day and we're celebrating the holistic development that goes outside of just hockey. But at the same time, like we do need to keep climbing. It doesn't matter if it was this year, next year. That's the expectation of our group is that we're never going to be satisfied. And you have to kind of set the bar of expectation and continue to raise it. And so I think that as we went into the second half, the conversation started to change. We said, "What if we are a team that steals points on the weekends? What if we go into every weekend genuinely and authentically believing that we're going to win or that we got the chance to win?" And I'm sure, as you know, with every single team, that is probably the most dangerous thing you can ever have is belief. And it only takes a couple games, and I think that's what we showed in that second half of the season is we started to ramp up, we started to play better, we swept Duluth, who were number 4 in the country at the time, and then we
You had a
go
good
on.
weekend against Ohio State too, didn't you? Mixed in there. Yeah.
Yep, and so we actually were beating Ohio State with 20 seconds left.
Oh
And,
man.
yeah, and, like, they're the runner-up for the national tournament, so I don't think it takes a lot, but it takes 1 or 2 kind of moments that changes everything for a program, and I think in the second half, we created those moments of belief, and that's actually what's gonna springboard us as we go into next year, that now they don't have to think it's possible, they believe it's possible because 'cause they've already proved it to themselves.
What opportunity is starting with a clean slate next year? Uh, right from the start of the season, what opportunity is that going to afford you as a coach to maybe? And I guess what I'm getting at is I think that there's things that you can say or communicate early on in a season that maybe don't land as well later on. How do you leverage that opportunity to start with your team from day one?
Oh gosh, yeah, we've got, like, PDFs going right now of.
Already, eh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you really do, you have to kinda, like, fine tune it and filter it because, people only have capacities for so many ideas and so many approaches, and so we're trying to be intentional in that, but, as we move into next year, like, the things I'm most excited about really are a reset of our culture and new values and clean slate in that way. I think I'm really looking forward to just the upperclassmen. You mentioned how young we were this year. And our primary kind of a lot of our best players, admittedly, were underclassmen this season. And so as they all continue to grow and now they're moving more into that upperclassmen space, now they feel like not only on the ice, but off the ice, now they have permission to lead differently and to step into different spots. And so as we go into next year, I think there's a tremendous opportunity to kind of reset the scales and build a new culture and build on some of the foundational pieces that we already have. And so we're looking forward to that. And I mean, one thing I know I've been talking with our staff a lot about is this idea, and I shared this with our athletic director. We started talking kind of in those November, December months, and we were talking a lot about, and he had a great question. We talked about how you create an environment where people want to get better just on their own when no one else is looking. Um, how do you create that for someone else? And I walked away from that meeting, and for 2 weeks, my head just, like, was spinning on that. I'm like, "Yeah," and, like, I've reframed the question as, like, how do you create intrinsic motivation? right? Like, that's what it comes down to me, is like, that's when no one else is looking. Intrinsic motivation is what you do on your own accord. And it's really interesting because there's actual evidence and answers out there to it, but they talk a lot about creating spaces of autonomy, for example, where you give players the space to go out and individually hone a skill and own it. So spaces of autonomy are really important. They talk about competence. And so, as coaches, it's really important that we actually provide the knowledge and the skill sets to help them be successful. Like, that's a very important part of being intrinsically motivated. And then, oddly enough, in line with this conversation, the third one and this is all from self determination theory, if there's any nerds out there that want to go look this stuff up. But the third one that they talk a lot about is connection. And so,
Yeah.
relationship building and how important that is in a group environment if you want people to then buy in at the individual level and commit to a bigger group. So it's really interesting because, yeah, as we project out and we think about how are we going to do things, that's my number one goal as a coach is, can we graduate players after their 4 years, holistically develop them in the hockey and every other space possible? And can we create intrinsic motivation in these young women where they go out into the world and they want to be the best version of themselves, not because they're getting paid to do it, not because someone's asking them, but because they want to.
Two interesting comments on that. One, I think it just came out last week. We had Jeff Tambellini, who's the director of player development for the Kraken, and obviously there's a lot of elements that go into that stew of creating an NHL player. But I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but effectively said like his number one job is to get people addicted to self improvement. And the other story that kind of I think resonates is I've got it on the shelf here somewhere behind me, but it's Mike Keenan's autobiography, and he talks about when he first got the job with the Philadelphia Flyers. He knew that he couldn't compete, like never played in the NHL, had kind of rounded the bases, and that's kind of how he framed it up. He wrote this letter to Ed Snyder and basically highlighted all the examples of saying, like, I didn't have to do this thing, but I just did this thing. And when you get me, you're going to get somebody that's just going to leave no stone unturned. And that's ultimately how he got the job. And I just think that there's so much to be said for that. And you talk about that autonomy or just the agency sports can give players that sticks with them for life is, I think ultimately, I think you said it best. Like that's the goal here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think of like, I mean, John Cooper comes to mind as like one of
Yeah.
my favorite coaches because, again, his priorities are, in my opinion, they're just in the right place. Like the way he treats and interacts with his players and what he prioritizes. You look at a pedigree perspective, and there's plenty of coaches out there that maybe have a deeper resume, but man, has he done a tremendous job. And I do think it comes back to the idea of player development can be, again, a 10-year-old, it could be a 21-year-old woman, or it could be a professional hockey player.
You mentioned, creating the values within your program. And so I'm looking at your CV and I'm like, it would be so easy for you to say, all right, team, like I've got my PhD, I've taken all these courses, I've got a bunch of quotes. Like, I don't really need your input because I've already seen all the research and data on how, winning teams are put together. Right. Like you could, I'm sure you've got, all kinds of PDFs and information on this. However, given that, I'd be curious to know, like, what does that look like in action when you're like, hey, we can all agree that, it's important to have these values and these things that, when things get rocky, we can, help anchor us. How do you create that hand in hand in partnership with your players?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I will say any knowledge that I have is stolen. Like, that's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten is like, the best ideas are stolen. And it's so true. So that's why you have to ask. Cause I'm like, I don't have any bit of knowledge from just original thought. I steal from others, and players are included in that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to connect with players and try to harness some of that information, some of that knowledge, because doesn't matter if it's in my space or someone else in the corporate world. I really do believe that people are all the experts of their own life. Like, who am I to say that this player, I understand them in a way that they don't understand them? I mean, they know what they're bringing to the table every day. There's actually a really fascinating concept. It's called Sonder that you should
How do you
definitely look
spell
up.
that?
Sonder. I should get like royalties for the author of this
I
book.
was gonna say that, yeah. Like
Yeah,
like the
like,
show notes here are gonna be,
I'll reach out to him.
it's gonna be meaty here to get through
Yeah,
it.
there you go. But there's this really a cool author, Koenig, I think is how you say his last name, but he wrote this book and it's called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. And what he did is he reaches out and people will just send him information. So they'll say, I've had this experience. I don't have a word for it, but I'm kind of curious if other people have experienced it too. Because we have like our seven primary feeling words, anger, happiness, whatever. But there's a lot of experiences that people have that are shared that we don't have a word for. So he created this whole book, and Sonder is one of these words. It's one of my favorite words. And the concept of it is that everyone's life is as vivid and complex as your own. But we kind of forget to give grace in that. And so if we can have this understanding that, like, when Aaron shows up to work, his life is just as complicated as mine, and maybe he's off today and there might be a really really good reason for that, that if I had understanding I'd have a lot more empathy for him. And so this idea of Sonder, I think that's kind of how I think about interacting with players, is when you have a group of 23, 24 people, there is inevitably a good percentage of them that are having a hard day. They had a really tough biology exam, or someone's grandparent is passing away, or maybe someone just got like amazing information in their life. And so you're in this fluctuation of everyone's coming with these different
Yeah, and it all matters.
it all matters in how we show up.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why the checkpoints are important, because the amount of times that I have reacted instead of responded, I'm not proud of, because you get information or someone has a bad practice and you're like, come on, like, why aren't you better today? And then you learn the story behind what their day looked like. And you're like, oh my gosh, thanks for being here. Like, we're just lucky that you're here today. So, again, long story longer, I think that's a big part of like understanding your players is you need to give grace and understand everyone's like coming with a different story every single day, different challenges they bring to the table. And so the more that we can understand that and ask them not only about their life, but some of their insights in the locker room and how is the team doing and what's our leadership group like. They are the experts on their own lives, and let's not pretend that we're the experts on anyone else's.
Man, I just, there's a great, have you seen, it's I was just looking it up. The Norwich City Football Club put out an ad for mental health.
I think I actually might have seen that.
And it's like there's two guys that are showing up every day at the game day,
Yes,
and one guy's
yes,
always enthusiastic, and then one day one doesn't show up, and
yeah, and it was the surprising one. That's it. That is Sonder. Put that in your show notes. That video
yeah,
next to Sonder. It's a great example.
no, and I mean, man, I would say that, you know, coaching has evolved so much, but that's, I think, really, and we've just heard it in, in through language on the show, that just that recognition. And it's odd that that is the thing, that recognizing that everybody has a lived experience outside your team, that influences what happens within your team. It's so interesting that it's taken so long to become obvious, and something that we all need to be mindful of, as we lead people. Um, when it comes to, the tactical side of the game. So again, all of a sudden November shows up and it's like, you know, Coach Bronson gets to design practice, and practice is fascinating because within a 60-minute window, the amount of opportunity or ways that you could design that 60 minutes is almost infinite. Um, did practice change, or was there anything that, be it from your coaching experience or experience as a player, where you said, hey, like, we're going to start doing things a little bit differently or focusing on different areas to enhance what happened in those practice environments?
Yeah, I would say a little bit. I mean, you alluded to this with like a mid-year transition. It didn't feel like the time and space to start to upset the apple cart and try to do a lot of things totally different, because at the foundation, I feel like we had a really good idea and approach for how we were going about playing our opponents. And so I think that was something we were trying to tread lightly. It was not to just force this huge transition mid-season when there was so much already that was on their plates, especially as a student athlete in college. I mean, they're balancing school and friendships and family and all those things outside the rink too. And so I think we really did try to stay kind of to our core, our foundations. But I think what we tried to change was practice structure a little bit. So, while we kept maybe the forecheck pretty consistent, where we had this version for the more aggressive forecheck, we had this for a little bit more of a passive forecheck. We might have started to redesign, like, let's do completely new drills. Let's make it feel like a brand new space, working on a lot of the same things, but like, let's keep it fresh and different and provide different energy to things. I know you and I have talked about the speaking opportunity that I'll get to do in May and the long change effect. I mean, we stumbled on some of that information with the second period, and we're like, gosh, how do we start to build a little identity around a new idea here? Because I do think like there's something to be said about the placebo effect of new and different and evolving. And I think a lot of coaches miss that opportunity. They go back to their blueprint of what has always worked. But I just strongly believe what worked 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and sometimes 5 days ago against a different opponent isn't going to work in the same way that you want it to 2 days from now against a different one. So I think the ability to adapt, change, keep things fresh for your athletes, they're never going to be mad at you for kind of keeping things exciting in that space.
It's so interesting because I think that, again, just through these conversations, one thing I've come to appreciate is that we're not all blessed to coach a team, as you've referenced, like, Wisconsin with a whole bunch of, national team players. But, one of the, I guess the art forms of coaching, I think, is that if you can find something that your team focuses on, that just by way of you're the only, that you just make that your own thing, and you're probably the only team that's measuring it, then you have a chance to be maybe the best at something and something you can really hang your hat on. And that might be how you change in the second period. That might be like how many pucks you turn over on the back check. But I just think that there's something in there that, regardless of what level you're coaching, like if you try and compare yourself to other teams and grade A scoring chances, well, you might do your absolute best and still finish, in the back of the line. But if you can find something that kind of your team can say, hey, like, we can be really good at something, like,
Mhm.
that might become a bit of a virus in a positive way, where your team just starts to gain confidence and they might start believing they can do the thing that maybe they're not that well equipped to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like what you're describing, Aaron, is just providing identity,
Yeah,
right? Like, sometimes it's not even important what those pieces of the identity are, but it's more important that you have one.
sure.
Right? Like, you
Yeah.
have conviction and being like, "This is who we are," because when you're confident in who you are, I mean, think about what that does for you as an individual, what it does for a power play system, what it does for a team, because there's a level of, like I said, conviction and confidence that you show up and you're sure in that space. And so, is it the difference of we're going to be a team that really capitalizes on odd man rush opportunities and this is how we're going to do it, versus we're going to be a team that really, hangs our hat on defensive play and getting pucks out on lines? Like, I don't know, that's so important, what specifically those are, because hockey is not that complicated of a game. My coworker Marty, he always says there's no hidden secrets in hockey. Like, we're all trying to fundamentally do a lot of the same things, but it's how much buy-in and identity you can get in your group so that those small moments, like you said, are a springboard for confidence in all the other spaces.
We're all aware there's, the changing landscape of our sport, specifically in college athletics, with the transfer portal, with NIL. I hear from coaches all the time at your level, and I think this has sort of become a bit of the public narrative, where there's a lot of empathy for coaches, and that recruiting's a 365 endeavor now. You're just, you hear the stories of, we're sending the wrong message to players, and that it's become very transactional, on and on and on. I was thinking about this, again, just looking at your circumstance, where you've got a young team, you're in a really tough conference, and you're getting this new rink, right? And it's like on campus, and I started to think, well, what's this? Maybe the story we're not telling is the effect that this is having on athletes that maybe aren't the player that's going to get highly recruited out of the portal, that's maybe not getting offered a ton of NIL money, where I could see players on your roster that are like, oh shit, like we're getting this new rink. Like, is Coach Bronson going to go out and recruit a bunch of other players from other teams and replace us? Because I have no doubt that there's an opportunity for that to a certain extent. And I sense that there's this balance of, you're no different than any other coach. You're paid to win. You're paid to create a great environment and a great culture, but you're going to ultimately get measured on wins and losses. How do what's the player side of that? And I guess, how do you balance that? Because I imagine, I mean, you have to be transparent. You don't want to fool anybody, but also you probably don't want players in December thinking like, man, if I don't score here quick, like maybe I'm looking for a new place to play next year.
Yeah. Aaron, I feel like you bugged our office or something because the amount of conversations that I've had with staff, like even at home, just about these, you took the words from my mouth. I mean, it is such a challenging time to be in college athletics, and to be a college coach, it is so hard right now, because I really do think that most college coaches, and probably professional coaches too, but certainly at the college level, where that development piece has always been so foundational of why people get into college, it's really being challenged right now, because you're right. Like at the end of the day, as a coach, it is my and our job to field the most successful hockey program we possibly can. And every single player on the team, they want and they deserve that too. And so I think where it really becomes challenging is when you have to think about 23, 24, 25 people, and you can't think about one in different moments, because there's always those hard moments of, is our roster depth too big right now? Is there going to be another player that sits in the stands now that we bring in a transfer? And so those are conversations as a staff that we are having constantly, because it is so hard, because I do feel like in college athletics, we're really getting kind of pigeonholed, forced into this environment of transaction. And it's certainly not how I like to do things. I don't think it's how most coaches like to do things. And at the same time, you're not doing your job if you're not having a business perspective at some point to say, we need to make the best team possible. And so I think for us, a lot of what it comes down to, especially with the transfer portal, is when you bring in players from the transfer portal, you better be dang sure that they're going to contribute from an on ice perspective and in the locker room space, that everyone in your group says, I get it. I understand. They are making our organization better. And if you are bringing someone in that doesn't do that, whether that's from a, personal perspective or from an on ice perspective, where all of a sudden they come in as a transfer, now they're playing over 9 other players, but they're not that different. That's where I think it becomes really challenging, because you recruited all those players and you said you'd have an opportunity. So there's not necessarily an answer in how I'm saying this, because I think it really is it's a huge challenge. It's so fluid. I think we're all trying to do our best, and I hope that at the end of the day, like, the families that we recruit and the athletes that are in our programs, they do know that at the end of the day, when we put our heads on our pillow at night, the last question I ask myself is, am I doing what's best for our program? And if I can answer that with a yes, then I know the foundation is good of how I'm making my decisions. And so it is challenging, and it's an interesting time to be in college athletics. But like I said, I think we're all navigating it together, and that trust and rapport with your players, and understanding of where we're all trying to move together is the most important part.
Kind of along those lines. Last night was the men's NCAA men's basketball championship. Great game. Florida beats Houston, and a lot has been made about Florida's roster construction, and that they really relied on analytics, and B, that they recruited a lot of unheralded players, but the sum would appear to be greater than the parts. And I look at where you're recruiting from. There's a statistic, and I'll get the exact number wrong, but um, the majority, when you look at where um, uh, female NCAA hockey players the majority come from the state of Minnesota. So you've got this fertile recruiting ground in your backyard, lots of talent. Lots of talent doesn't always equate to the best team. And you talk about identity. When you look for fit, the on ice stuff aside, like what are you looking for in players that let you know, regardless if they're um, on the power play or if they're on the penalty kill or if they're a player that's in and out of the lineup? Here's sort of the common traits that I'm looking for to build the type of team that's going to fit, I guess, your program, but probably just as much you as a person.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my head automatically goes to three spaces. One is family. You
Yeah.
mentioned this with my parents. Anything I've ever accomplished that's even noteworthy is because of my parents
Yeah.
and how they raised me, right? So family is really important because while they're individuals and they show up at your campus and they live their adult life, they still hear from their parents all the time and they still get direction from them. And foundation
So
of who
true.
they are comes from your upbringing. I think that's a huge part of it. So I think that's a big part of it. I would say that I look for leadership. I think it's hard to identify, but I think it's one of those kind of like it factors where like you just know when it exists. Like you can see little bits and pieces, even in a 16-year-old young woman, where you're like, yeah, that's going to flourish. That will foster over time, and we can help make sure that that fosters over time. So I think small moments of leadership or just evidence of that is really, really helpful in a team environment. And then the other thing I would say is I go back to the intrinsic motivation. Like I ask questions to try to understand with these athletes, are you intrinsically motivated? Like, are you going to work harder than I'm going to make you work hard? And we're going to push you and challenge you and hold you accountable. But my coworker, Allie, talks about you have to start your own engine. Right. And I think that's a Pat Summitt quote where she talks to her son about that in basketball. And she's like, sweetheart, I will coach you up. I will do everything you ever ask for me to kind of give you feedback and help you, but you have to start your own engine. So for these recruits, I talk to their coaches. I eventually talk to them when they're age eligible, and I try to figure out like what's the extra things they do. Do they do sled pulls in their backyard? Do they shoot the extra 1,000 pucks like by themselves? Do they go out of their way to try to get their own ice time? Do they go skate on the backyard rinks? So it is awfully easy to help motivate someone who is self motivated. It's a lot harder when they don't have that intrinsic drive.
Love that. Love that. You had the opportunity, I understand, to go to the Boston Bruins
Mhm.
development camp. Is that right?
Yep. Yep.
What did you take away from that experience?
Just a lot. I mean, that environment was really, really rewarding for me because talk about getting out of your comfort zone. I mean, that was a completely new space for me for so many reasons. And I really think like Danny Marmer was with the program at the time. She's now a GM in the PWHL, and she's the one that really kind of got me hooked up with that opportunity. But to be standing, like their first meeting, I'm talking with Don Sweeney. He goes out of his way to like spend probably 30, 40 minutes talking to me where I'm
No
just,
way.
yeah, I can't believe that like the GM is like spending his valuable time. I'm like, Don, like go like talk with the guy. So really like a fantastic experience, whether it was from literally the GM level, all the way down to like just being on the ice with these really talented young men who just like they're sponges, like they want to learn. And I think really like let's call a spade, interesting for them, probably for the first time in their life to be on the ice with a female too. I mean, that's a part of the programming. That's why I was there. And so for me to kind of lean into that space of giving coaching feedback and jumping in and helping out in those drills, but then just ultimately just see, I think at the end of the day, boys, girls does not matter. A hockey player, all they want to know is like, can you help me get better? And if you can help develop them, I don't think they care what you look like. I don't think they care what your age is. Like if you can help them get better in some space, they're listening. And so I think that was a really cool experience for me and just a good reminder of as we coach people, regardless of age, gender, anything like that, just the importance of making sure that we're giving coaching feedback that is valuable and meaningful and intentional. Because if you can do that, you can change the trajectory for people.
So, Bethany, if I was in your shoes and I had the opportunity to go to the Boston Bruins development camp, I would have imposter syndrome.
Absolutely.
And I've been coaching and been around the game for a long time, but in that area, I would be probably staring at my shoes most of the time.
Mhm.
And one thing that has really dawned on me is that we've had a lot of female leaders on this show, on our stage at TCS Live. We've really tried to be intentional about that. And again, I don't have the lived experience, but just through hearing their stories, I come to appreciate, like, man, like, as a female going into that environment, or being a female coach in men's pro hockey, like, there's just a whole nother layer that I can't relate to. But I know that there's probably a lot of female coaches listening to this right now that are going to get similar opportunities. And probably the easiest thing to say is no,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
What advice do you have to say, hey, when you get these opportunities, here's how you can maybe push past what's comfortable? And because I would imagine that once you do it, like, it's got to be incredibly rewarding. And it's probably like a lot of things, like, you just got to put yourself out there and trust that it's going to be worthwhile. Any advice?
Yeah. Don't say no.
Yeah.
Like, say yes. I mean, I know people kind of joke about this and stuff of like to do something that scares you every day. What people forget is like we're all scared. We all have imposter syndrome. We're all not sure. Like every single person that you come across is human. And we like to convince ourselves that that's a siloed experience and it's just not. I think the biggest difference between the people that really thrive in their lives, that accomplish things, and you look at these people and you're like, they're so wildly successful. Like, why? And I think it's because it's that 5-second window of courage that they say yes and they lean into the scary moments, because that's the difference. Like Mel Robbins talks about that a lot. Like that's her coined phrase, is that 5-second rule of there's a window of opportunity in your brain. And if you give it 10 seconds or 15 seconds, your brain is going to talk you out of doing anything uncomfortable. Because that's survival, that's instinct for us. Things that were uncomfortable led to death and things like that way back when. And so our brains, we don't want to go up and give the public speaking, like we don't want to go to the Bruins camp because it feels intimidating. But you have to find that 5-second window to say yes. And then I think also be confident enough to be who you are, because there's some reason that you got into that situation. You have to trust that process. So be confident in who you are, or as confident as you can be. And then be humble too. Like in that space, you talked about looking at your shoes. You know how many times I was looking at my shoes at the Boston Bruins camp? I was like, it's okay to not try to insert yourself and pretend you're the smartest person in the room or that you have the most knowledge in this environment. I didn't. So be a sponge, learn, and be okay and humble enough to say, I can step into this space and I don't have to go in and prove myself. I just need to be myself and be humble
Yeah.
enough to learn.
That's great advice. Love that. And thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, Bethany, I can tell from this conversation that if you started a book club, I would be the first person to sign up. I
Okay.
sense for
I'm
a little bit
interested.
of like,
Yeah.
what's on your nightstand these days, and is there any resources that you would recommend to fellow coaches that they tap into?
Oh gosh, good question. Is that a Brene Brown reference? What's on your nightstand? Because she's one of my favorites. I feel like she always asks that in her
Does
podcast.
she? You know what? I've listened to her stuff, so it may have
Maybe,
just like
yeah,
jumped into my brain. Yeah.
subconscious. Yes. So, well, speaking of Brene Brown, like I would be remiss if I had any type of interview opportunity and didn't bring her up, because I'm like her biggest fangirl. I think her work is fantastic, and leadership and vulnerability and all those. Yeah. So I do really like her work. Gosh, from a book perspective, you're gonna make me try to narrow that down. Um, right now, I actually am reading Mel Robbins' other book. I know it's just like super popular right now. It's called The Let Them Theory.
So I will say I highly recommend this. I knew who Mel Robbins was.
Yeah.
And probably like a lot of people, just like it's unlimited how much content we could consume. I had never listened to her until there's a podcast called Pivot, and it's a
Yes.
handful of ex-NFL guys, and she was on it, and she shared the whole let them theory. And then I was just like, I probably spent 2 weeks just consuming like everything I could. She's fantastic. Yeah. But well,
Yeah.
again, we'll throw that in the show notes too. We'll just
Okay.
keep going there. Yeah. Check that
Um,
out.
yeah, no, I would say like Mel Robbins, I love her stuff. I just mentioned the 5 second rule. That's really interesting. That's good. Anything Brene Brown, love her. Simon Sinek is another one of my kind of favorite leadership gurus. I think he's really gifted. And then I would say too, the other one that I've been really big into this space is like Atomic Habits. I love the idea of like the law of, I think it's aggregation of marginal gains is what it's called, or the 1% better philosophy is like, how do you get 1% better in all these different ways? And I think that's actually, that is the atomic change that happens is when you're getting better in small ways. So I think that one's by James Clear. Um, and then, who is it? Duhigg, I think, has the other kind of big habits based book, Power of Habit, maybe. So I'm a big
I read
habit
that one.
person, and
Okay.
yeah, that's
All
a
right.
good one. So yeah, I don't my yeah, don't ask me that. I feel like my library is like you look behind you, and I have an embarrassing amount of materials. I do have a professional development document that I share with our athletes. That it's like
Huh.
every good TED Talk, YouTube, book, podcast that I've stumbled into,
No way.
on there. So if you're interested in it, I'm happy to share that because that would probably do justice to all the people and materials out there that deserve to be mentioned. So
Okay. That is amazing. I had one more question, but now I have two. What's your best habit? What's your worst habit?
oh gosh, you're gonna make me say this on a recording. My best habit, getting up early. That kind of organically happened. I'm not a great sleeper by nature, but I typically get up somewhere from 5 to 5:30 now. Sometimes earlier, it just kind of depends. Sometimes a little bit later, but I just feel like if you can get into the pattern of behavior of starting your day early, for me, I feel like I wake up and there's like this really sacred space of an hour, maybe two, where it's like just me and the world. I can do work, I can work out, like all good things happen for me in those first couple hours of how I start my day. And so I think over time that's become my best habit. My worst habit, gosh, I don't know. You should probably ask my spouse that question. I'm sure that's a hefty list. Um,
Right now, mine's watching White Lotus before bedtime.
Oh,
It
well,
just really screwed up my sleep.
that's a pretty good worst habit. I think okay, honestly, my worst habit is more of like an attribute. I'm like a chronic achiever, like, I can't say no and, like, try like, I can't compartmentalize as much as I
Oh,
should.
don't say that after we invite you to come speak in Sweden.
Oh,
I
no,
feel
I know,
guilty now.
see, like, I want to keep, like, doing as much as possible. It's called hedonic adaptation, again, talk about nerding out and things to look up.
Yeah,
Hedonic adaptation, it's just like you're constantly chasing the next thing, and it can be really great for development because it leaves,
yeah.
very high achiever.
What's it called again?
Hedonic adaptation,
Jesus. Okay.
and, that is
Justin, I hope you wrote that down because I
oh,
can't
that
do
is
it.
my kryptonite, you guys. It's terrible. So, like, just the ability to, like, slow down, be present, enjoy the moment, that's something I wish that, that I was a lot better at and something I'm working on.
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question.
Okay.
Can you explain to us how a hockey season is like an ice cube?
Did you listen to that? Okay. Yeah, I suppose there's an analogy for that. So I'm stealing this from Atomic Habits. Give credit where credit's due. This is James Clear, not me. But he talked about, and I used this analogy right around that Duluth series when we had swept them. And he uses the analogy of change happening seemingly all at once. So, from an outside perspective, you might be watching someone or a group or whatever, and there's some big moment of success. They write a book or something like that. And we all think it comes out left field like, oh my gosh, how did that person, how did that group all of a sudden have just this pivotal moment of success? Like, that's crazy overnight. And he talks about how change actually happens like an ice cube. And you envision this ice cube sitting on a table, and the room that it's in is freezing temperature. So it's 29 degrees, let's say. and you warm up the room and the thermostat starts climbing 30 degrees, 31 degrees. Nothing happens to the ice cube. It's climbing, and the ice cube never changes until it hits the point of freezing and it goes 1 degree more. And then the ice cube starts to melt. And so he talks about how important habits are. Like it's just these small, tiny incremental changes for our team. When I use the analogy, it was about putting in 3.5 years of effort up until that point of practices and showing up for one another and doing all the things the right way, to all of a sudden you have this monumental historic win and everyone's going, how did that happen? And the group or the individual is going, I know exactly how it happened. It was in all those details over all those years. It just happened to hit that 1 degree of separation that everyone else noticed that the ice cube melted.
Love that. I'm going to close things off here. Interesting story. So I'm in the habit, speaking of habits, whether it's guests on the show, people I meet in the hockey community, I often ask them, I'm like, who's the coach that I don't know about that I should be talking to? And so earlier this year we had, and I'll get a lot of names. And some cases I know who they are. In some cases I've got to do some research. And we had Kim Wise on the show. And I said specifically, when I speak with female coaches, I'm like, again, just want to be intentional about shedding light on people that have earned it. I said, who are the female coaches that I need to be talking to? And she gave me a list and your name was on, and I did my research and I'm like, and I started reading up about you. But then I started going back in my notes and I realized that a name that I had overlooked over the past several years was your name. And what was really interesting was the amount of other female leaders in the sport who referenced you as somebody that, had a lot of talent and was somebody that was doing the work. And so I wanted to shout that out. I thought it was really complimentary and it was pretty cool. And I think it was just, again, something that we feel really fortunate that, we just get to, share people's stories and it, especially when we can catch people like yourself, when I feel like we're just on the infancy of something really special. And so, with that, Bethany, thank you so much for spending time with us, and best of luck to you. And is it the Tommies? Is that what we?
It is the Tommies. Yep.
It's the Tommies. Okay.
Right.
All right. Best of luck to you and the Tommies as you enter a new phase of the program next year.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. And I definitely appreciate, more than having me on the show. The coach's site is, I told you this on the phone, but just to grow it from when you're talking with Brad Frost, right, and scribbling notes, it's really become an incredible organization. And I feel very, very honored to even have been asked to join. So thank you for having me.